The Great Awakening. The Great Awakening began in the New England colonies in the late 17th century. Religion had been declining due to the new ideas and lifestyles inspired by the Age of Enlightenment. The Age of Enlightenment supported knowledge and science above superstition and religion. Aside from these new ideas, churchgoers also faced problems with the requirements that were demanded of the people in order to be a member of the parish. In 1662, the New England colonies created the Halfway Covenant to try to draw the younger generations of the colonists back to the church. This covenant lessened the cruciality of following strict church protocol, but still allowed for people to be baptized and call themselves members of the parish, so they were not allowed to take communion or vote. Despite the efforts, people were still straying from the church and thus from God. The colonies needed a leader to reform religion and bring them back to their faith. Enter Jonathan Edwards, a pastor's son and graduate of Yale with a passion for God. He approached the scripture with logic and bountiful new ideas that were innovative and provocative. Edwards regarded people as sinners who needed their consciences reawakened. In his journals, Edwards wrote that people were more concerned with the vanity of things such as profit, pleasures, material possessions, drinking, and profanity than for the church and God and their immortal souls. He began the Great Awakening by preaching in his own church in Northampton, Massachusetts. His sermons were based on the idea of divine punishment and a fear of God's wrath. He claimed that one should not believe in salvation through good deeds, but rely solely on God's grace. His most famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, sparked passion among all who heard it. Here we have an excerpt from his sermon.
The wrath of God is like great waters that are dammed for the present. They increase more and more, and they rise higher and higher till an outlet is given, and the longer the stream is stopped, the more rapid and mighty is its course when once it is let loose. It is true that judgment against your evil works has not been executed hitherto. The floods of God's vengeance have been withheld, but your guilt in the meantime is constantly increasing, and you are every day treasuring up more wrath. The waters are constantly rising and waxing more and more mighty, and there is nothing but the mere pleasure of God that holds the waters back, that are unwilling to be stopped and press hard to go forward. If God should only withdraw his hand from the floodgates, it would immediately fly open, and the fiery floods of the fierceness and wrath of God would rush forth with inconceivable fury, and would come upon you with omnipotent power, and if your strength were 10,000 times greater than it is, yea, 10,000 times greater than the strength of the stoutest, sturdiest devil in hell, it would be nothing to withstand or endure.
As compelling and provocative as his sermons were, the man who really drove the words into people's souls and who spread Edwards' ideas across the colonies was George Whitefield. Jonathan Edwards may have started the Great Awakening of religion, but George Whitefield made it a true revolution. As a young man, Whitefield worked in the family tavern and dreamed of being an actor in the theater. When he was 21, he became, in his own words, a fool for God, thus starting his career as a preacher. He toured the colonies, preaching outdoors to mass crowds of people. He spread his message of human helplessness and God's divinity. A sermon held by him in Boston, Massachusetts, brought a gathering of nearly 30,000 people. Whitefield's voice boomed over enthralled listeners and filled them with emotion. People would break down in tears, and women would faint as he shook his audience with intense emotion and theatrics. During the time of Whitefield's preaching, nearly 80% of the population of the American colonies heard his sermon at least once. Even Benjamin Franklin donated the coins in his pocket to the man after hearing him speak, showing the sermons were inspirational even to those of a scientific mindset. Whitefield's words had an instant reaction among those who heard him, and so reform came in no time at all. The revolution of the Christian religion ends around the 1740s. By now, faith has been revived throughout the colonies. Over 150 new churches were started by 1742. People changed from being unconcerned about religion to being devoted to faith, and all it took was a new way of looking at things, and a good dose of enthusiasm from concerned men of God.